A single candle flickers in a castle's cold stone room. A shadowy figure holds a piece of parchment, a message that must not fall into the wrong hands. It must be cut into pieces and burned, but the only tool is a pair of newly forged scissors, their metal still smelling of fire and mystery. This simple object was not just a tool, it was a key to silence, to secrets, to survival. By the end of this story, you will know the incredible hidden art of how medieval blacksmiths forged these essential instruments, a craft that blended elemental power with delicate precision. We will uncover how a lump of raw earth was transformed into a gleaming tool of intrigue. What forgotten object in your own home holds a secret history just as deep his world was one of fire and shadow, a place where earth and air converged to birth new forms from raw metal. The medieval blacksmith stood as a pillar of his community, a figure who commanded not just brute strength but a deep, almost secretive knowledge. He was part artisan, part alchemist, transforming the mundane into the essential. Villagers relied on him for everything from the nails in their doors to the plows that tilled their fields, yet they often regarded his work with a sense of awe. He understood the soul of iron in a way few others could, a knowledge passed down through generations that was as much about intuition as it was about technique. At the center of this mystery was his forge, the vibrant, beating heart of his operation. It was more than just a workshop, it was a theater of elemental forces. The constant roar of the bellows was the breath of the place, feeding the fire until it glowed with a heat that could be felt deep in your bones. The air itself tasted of coal, smoke, and scorched metal, a scent that clung to the blacksmith's leather apron and the very walls of his smithy. This was where the ordinary met the extraordinary. While the crafting of a knight's sword is often celebrated, the creation of a humble pair of scissors required the same profound skill. In many ways, the scissors were a greater test of a smith's finesse. A sword is a statement of power, but scissors are a tool of delicate purpose, used by scribes to trim precious vellum or by tailors to cut fine cloth. Their value in the daily commerce of secrets and survival was immense. To truly grasp how such a precise instrument was forged, we must first step into the smith's soot-stained shoes. We must appreciate the environment where this magic happened, a space where every tool had its purpose and every action was a calculated step in an ancient dance. The mystery of the scissors begins not with the metal itself, but with the man who knew how to listen to it, to feel its potential hidden within the unrefined ore. What kind of mind could look at a rough lump of iron and see within it the slender, graceful curves of two perfectly matched blades? That profound skill began with a choice made far from the roaring forge. Before the hammer ever struck, the blacksmith faced his first great puzzle, the mystery of the materials. His quest was for a specific kind of iron, one that could be hardened yet remain resilient, capable of holding a razor edge without becoming brittle. This was not a simple trip to a market. The finest iron often came from the cold, wet earth of peat bogs, a substance known as bog iron. It formed slowly over centuries as groundwater leached iron from the soil, depositing it in rusty, porous lumps that men would wade into murky waters to retrieve. Other smiths relied on ore dug from shallow pits, a backbreaking labor that yielded rock heavy with metallic promise. The source of this raw material was a secret as valuable as the finished blade itself. A blacksmith's reputation, his entire livelihood, could hinge on the hidden location of a particular bog or a specific vein of ore that produced superior metal. He would guard this knowledge fiercely, perhaps sharing it only with his son or most trusted apprentice. Think of it as a master chef protecting the identity of a rare mushroom forager, the entire flavor of his signature dish dependent on that single, secret ingredient. The journey of this iron was a long and arduous one. Once wrested from the earth, the raw ore or bog iron would be transported to a bloomery, a specialized furnace where it was smelted. There, under intense heat from charcoal, the rock would surrender its metallic heart. The iron would melt away from its impurities, forming a glowing, spongy mass called a bloom. This raw bloom was then sold or traded, making its way to the blacksmith's workshop. When that heavy, unrefined lump of iron finally landed on the smith's anvil, it was more than just raw material. It was potential captured from the landscape itself, the first critical step in an alchemical process that would transform earth into a tool of delicate purpose. But this lump of metal was still wild, unpredictable, and filled with the imperfections of its origin. Taming it required a deeper kind of magic, a direct conversation between the smith and the elements. This forge was the blacksmith's true partner in the alchemy of metal. Picture a hearth built of stone and clay, its mouth aglow with a bed of searing charcoal. The heat it generated was not a simple warmth, it was a physical force that pushed back the castle's pervasive chill and made the very air shimmer. To stand before it was to stand at the mouth of a miniature sun, a feeling of primal power that demanded respect. The key to controlling this sun was the bellows, a great leather lung operated by a strong arm or a faithful apprentice. With each heaving push, a deep whoosh of air would rush into the fire, making the coals blaze with a fierce, white-hot intensity. This was the breath of the forge, the very thing that gave the blacksmith command over the element of fire. It was a delicate balance, too little air and the fire would be lazy and cool, too much and the metal could burn, becoming brittle and useless. The smith did not just stoke a fire, he conducted it, reading the colors of the flames like a scholar reads a text. He knew the precise moment when the heat was perfect, a knowledge born of experience and an almost spiritual connection to his craft. Into this controlled inferno, the blacksmith would thrust that rough, dark lump of iron. It was a hard, unyielding thing, cold to the touch and seemingly dead. But the fire had the power to awaken it. Slowly, the metal would begin to drink in the heat, its color shifting from a dull black to a deep, bloody red. Then it would glow with a cherry warmth, and finally, it would achieve a brilliant, incandescent yellow, almost white at its core. At this moment, the iron underwent a miraculous transformation. It surrendered its brittle nature, becoming as soft and malleable as stiff clay. It was no longer a cold piece of the earth, but a glowing, pliable substance alive with potential energy. The blacksmith would then carefully withdraw it with long tongs, a star plucked from a private sky, ready to be shaped by his will. The mastery of this fire was everything. It was the difference between a tool that would snap under pressure and one that would last for generations. How many other ancient crafts relied on such an intimate dance with raw, untamed elements to create objects of both beauty and necessity? This glowing metal needed a surface as unyielding as the smith's own resolve. That surface was the anvil, the great indestructible heart of the smithy. Forged from wrought iron and faced with hardened steel, it was a single, massive block that might weigh as much as a full-grown person. It was not merely a table, it was a complex tool in its own right. Its flat, polished face, called the table, was the primary stage for hammering. One end tapered into a conical horn, perfect for beating metal into graceful curves, the kind needed for the elegant bows of a pair of scissors. The other end often held a square horn for bending angles, and scattered across its surface were precisely punched holes, the Hardy and Pritchell holes, which served as stations for specialized tools to punch holes or cut metal. The anvil was the unyielding earth, the absolute foundation against which all change was measured. When the smith placed his white-hot iron upon it, he was not just shaping metal, he was imposing his will upon the very elements. The hammer's strike was the question, and the anvil's ring was the definitive, resonant answer. That sound, a clear, sharp clang that could carry for miles, was the constant soundtrack of the medieval world. In a village, it was the rhythm of daily life, signaling that repairs were underway, that new tools were being born. But in a secluded castle smithy, late at night, that same ring took on a different tone. It was the sound of a secret being sealed into metal, the auditory signature of a message being cut into pieces or a lock being fashioned for a hidden drawer. Each strike was a beat in a rhythm of creation that echoed through stone corridors, a public noise masking a deeply private purpose. The hammer was an extension of the blacksmith's own arm, a carefully chosen instrument of force. He did not wield just one hammer, but a collection of them, each with a specific purpose in the sacred dance of shaping. For the initial, brutal work of drawing out the hot iron, he might call upon a heavy sledge, a two-handed maul that required the strength of his entire body or the help of his apprentice. Its thunderous blows moved the metal in great, sweeping gestures, beginning the transformation from a lump into a recognizable form. But for the delicate work of forging a pair of scissors, the primary tool was the hand hammer. This was his personal instrument, its handle worn smooth by the grip of his calloused palm, its weight and balance a perfect match for his own strength and rhythm. A lighter cross-peen hammer with a wedge-shaped face opposite its flat striking surface was essential for concentrating force to draw out the metal into the long, slender points required for the scissor blades. The blacksmith's skill was not in brute force alone, but in the precise control of that force. His strikes were not random, they followed a rhythm, a physical poetry of strike, pause, and turn. The hammer would fall with a sharp crack, the metal would yield, and in the brief moment before the next strike, the smith would rotate the workpiece on the anvil with his tongs, a fluid, unconscious motion born of countless repetitions. This rhythm was the music of creation, a percussive beat that transferred the smith's intention directly into the glowing steel. Every tap, every solid blow was a word in a silent language spoken between the craftsman and his material. This was not a skill learned quickly. It was a guarded tradition passed down through a long and arduous apprenticeship. A young apprentice would spend years performing the most basic tasks, watching, listening, and absorbing the master's movements before he was ever allowed to shape a critical piece. He learned not just how to swing the hammer, but how to listen to the sound it made against the anvil, how to read the way the metal shifted under its impact. He was learning to feel the soul of the iron, to understand its resistance and its willingness to be shaped. This intimate knowledge, this transfer of will from man to metal, was what separated a mere tool from a masterpiece. Could any modern machine ever replicate the subtle understanding embedded in that rhythmic human dance? Even with the hammer in his hand and the iron glowing on the anvil, the most critical work had already been done. The true creation of the scissors happened not in the heat of the forge, but in the quiet of the smith's mind. He faced a unique puzzle, an enigma of design where two separate pieces had to become one perfect mirrored whole. Each blade had to be the exact opposite of the other, a precise reflection in steel. A single error in this initial plan would render the entire effort useless, creating a tool that would bind and tear rather than cut cleanly. To solve this, the blacksmith relied on a simple yet brilliant tool, a template. He would carve the perfect shape of a single blade and its bow from a piece of wood, or sometimes from a scrap of sturdy bone. This pattern was his map, his unwavering guide through the fiery chaos of the forging process. It held the secret geometry of the future tool, a physical promise of the precision to come. The challenge was profound. He wasn't just designing a shape, he was engineering an action. The two bows, the elegant loops for the fingers, had to be perfectly aligned. They needed to pivot around a central point with a fluid, shearing motion, not a clumsy crush. Achieving this required a deep, intuitive understanding of leverage and balance, knowledge gained not from a book, but from years of watching how metal moves and feels in the hand. He had to envision the finished pair not as separate objects, but as a single dynamic mechanism. How many failed attempts, how many discarded pieces of metal lay behind the creation of that one perfect wooden template? That small piece of carved wood held more power than any sword, for it contained the invisible blueprint for 1,000 future cuts. The glowing iron rod was now ready for its first transformation. With a wooden template for a single blade resting nearby, the blacksmith would focus on a single piece of that precious metal. He would grip one end with his long tongs and thrust it back into the forge's heart, holding it steady in the nest of white-hot coals. He watched, his eyes squinting against the fierce light as the metal drank the fire. Its color shifted from a deep cherry red to a brilliant, luminous yellow-orange, the color of a summer sun at its peak. At this exact moment, the iron reached its most plastic state, soft and willing, ready to be reborn. He would then swiftly transfer the glowing rod to the anvil, the heat washing over his face in a wave. The first hammer blow was not delicate. It was a solid, authoritative crack that began the process known as drawing out. The smith's goal was to lengthen and flatten this thick rod, to spread its material out into a long, flat strip of consistent thickness. He used the wedge-shaped peen of his hammer, striking at an angle to push the metal outward, stretching it along the anvil's face. Strike, turn, strike, turn. This was a rhythmic, physical conversation. Each blow thinned and elongated the metal, and with every quick rotation of the tongs, the smith ensured the strip remained even, preventing weak spots or awkward bends. He was not just pounding mindlessly, he was guiding the flow of the metal itself, feeling its resistance and its surrender through the vibration in the hammer's handle. The orange glow of the iron would slowly fade to a dull red as it cooled, and the metal would begin to resist the hammer, becoming stubborn again. The moment this happened, the process would halt. The smith would never risk striking cold iron, as it could shatter or develop hidden fractures. So back into the roaring forge the metal would go, to be reheated to that perfect, yielding yellow-orange again and again. This cycle of heating, hammering, and cooling was repeated countless times for each blade. It was a test of patience as much as skill, a slow, deliberate unfolding of the metal's hidden form. With each return to the fire, the rough rod remembered less of its original shape and more of the smith's intention, gradually becoming that long, flat foundation upon which the entire secret of the scissors depended. This was the alchemy of force and fire, where a shapeless lump began to hold the memory of a future cut. The most delicate moment in the forging process had arrived. Before him lay the flattened strip of iron, its form still crude and linear. It held the potential for a blade, but none of its grace. The next series of actions required a touch as precise as a surgeon's, for the smith had to transform this straight piece of metal into a shape with two distinct personalities, a gentle curve for the cutting edge and a sharp, right-angled turn for the tang. He would return the very end of the strip to the fire, heating only a small, specific section to that perfect, yielding yellow. This localized heat was his only way to control the metal's memory, to persuade one part to bend while the rest remained rigid. With a glowing section positioned over the edge of the anvil, he would begin. A series of light, targeted hammer taps on the cooled portion just behind the hot spot initiated the bend, coaxing the metal into a slow, deliberate curve. This was the birth of the blade's elegant sweep, a contour that had to match its future twin perfectly. The hammer was not a brutal instrument here, but a painter's brush, applying pressure with subtlety and foresight. Then came the twist, a maneuver that felt almost like a violation of the iron's nature. To form the flat tang that would become the finger bow, the smith had to rotate a section of the metal a full 90 degrees. He might use a special tool, a pair of twisting tongs, to grip the glowing end and turn it against itself. The hot metal would groan internally, its grain structure realigning under the immense strain. One rushed movement, one strike with too much force, and the metal could thin catastrophically, develop a hidden crack, or simply warp into an irreparable shape. All the previous work, the drawing out, the careful heating and cooling, would be lost in an instant. This was where the smith's deep, intuitive feel for the material proved its worth. He was not just bending metal, he was negotiating with it, feeling its resistance through the tremor in the hammer's handle, and adjusting his blows in a fraction of a second. The successful creation of that first perfectly shaped blade, with its fluid curve and squarely set tang, was a quiet triumph. It was a testament to a knowledge that lived not in books, but in the hands and the heart, a secret geometry forged in fire and focus. This single point of connection was the soul of the entire tool. While the graceful curves of the blades captured the eye, it was a small, unassuming section of metal at their base that held the true power. The blacksmith's greatest challenge was not shaping the blades themselves, but forging the perfect pivot point, the future heart of the scissors' motion. Before any hole was ever punched, he had to build this critical joint directly into the hot iron. As he hammered the two separate blades into existence, he would deliberately leave a small, thickened lump of metal at the base of each one. This was not an error or an imperfection, it was a calculated act of foresight. This lump, often called the boss, had to be forged with incredible precision. It needed to be substantial enough to be drilled and shaped later, yet perfectly aligned so that when the two blades were joined, their cutting edges would meet flush along their entire length. The smith would constantly check his progress, holding the hot blade against his wooden template and then holding the two unfinished blades together, judging the alignment of these nascent bosses with a critical eye. He knew that a misstep here, a boss forged even slightly off-center, would create a pair of scissors that rubbed, gaped, or sheared poorly, rendering all his previous work worthless. The immense mechanical stress of every single cut would be transferred directly through this tiny pivot. It was the linchpin, the quiet king upon which the kingdom of the scissors depended. All the elegance of the sweeping blades and the comfort of the finger bows meant nothing if this one, forged not of metal, failed in its duty. How many seemingly simple objects in our own lives hide such a critically engineered heart? A single point of flawless execution that makes all the difference between function and failure. With the blades and their pivotal bosses complete, the smith's focus shifted to their final touch of human engineering, the bows. These elegant loops were not mere decoration. They were the vital interface between the tool and the hand, the point where human intention was translated into mechanical action. To create them, the blacksmith had to transform the flat, squared-off tangs at the end of each blade into perfect, smooth circles. This was a task of immense delicacy. He would heat only the very tip of a tang in the forge's edge, bringing it to a precise, glowing orange. The goal was to soften just enough metal to bend without losing the strength of the rest of the blade. Holding the hot tang with his tongs, he would position it over the conical horn of his anvil. Then, with a series of light, incredibly controlled hammer taps, he would begin to coax the straight metal into a curve. He was not smashing it into shape, he was persuading it, guiding the hot iron around the horn's curve in a continuous, fluid motion. One misjudged strike could easily fold the thin metal over on itself, creating a weak, pinched joint that would snap under pressure. The circle had to be seamless, with no beginning and no end, a continuous ring of solid iron. The size and proportion of these bows were a true mark of the smith's empathy and skill. A bow forged too small would painfully pinch the user's fingers, making sustained work impossible. A bow made too large would feel clumsy and loose, offering no control over the delicate cutting action. The master smith considered the hand that would use his tool, envisioning the tailor's nimble fingers or the scribe's careful grip. He shaped the bows to be not just functional but comfortable, an extension of the body itself. A poorly made bow could turn a precision instrument into a useless or even dangerous object, its sharp blades flailing uncontrollably with every frustrated squeeze. The final, satisfying click of the two perfect circles nesting together was a silent promise of effortless control, the last piece of a puzzle forged in fire and focus. A moment of profound separation now arrived in the smithy. The blacksmith held in his tongs what appeared to be a single, bizarre object, two blades and their bows forged as one solid piece of iron, joined by that thickened lump of metal at the pivot. This unity was an illusion, a necessary step that had to be violently undone. The scissors could not function as one piece, they had to become two. With the joined piece cooled, he positioned it carefully on the anvil's face. His tool for this delicate surgery was a sharp, wedge-shaped chisel made of hardened steel that fit perfectly into the square, hardy hole on the anvil. He positioned the joined pivot point directly over the hardy's keen edge. Then, with a heavy hammer in his other hand, he took a single, decisive swing. The sound was not the usual ringing clang, but a sharp, definitive crack. The hardy's edge bit deep into the soft iron, severing the molecular bonds that held the two halves together. With one or two more solid strikes, the metal gave way completely. The single entity was now two. This was a point of no return. There was no going back, no reheating the metal to rejoin a bad cut. The success of this single, brutal action determined the fate of the entire project. He now held two separate pieces in his hands, two siblings born from the same heated womb of metal. He would lay them side by side on the anvil's smooth table, his heart likely pausing for a beat as he inspected the cut faces. Were they perfectly flush? Did the two blades now mirror each other with the exact symmetry he had labored to forge? A clean cut meant the two halves would realign perfectly, their pivot points meeting as if they had never been parted. A ragged or angled cut, however, would introduce a wobble, a fundamental misalignment that no amount of finishing could ever correct. That sharp, clean crack of the hammer was the sound of a promise being tested, the moment a unified whole was split to create a partnership that would last for generations. But those two separate blades were still soft, unable to hold the razor edge a good pair of scissors demanded. They needed to be tempered, a final, alchemical ritual that walked a knife's edge between hardness and brittleness. The blacksmith would build his forge fire to a clean, even heat, then carefully suspend the blades within it. He watched, his eyes never leaving the metal as it began to glow. He was not waiting for a number on a dial, but for a specific, secret color, a shade of cherry red known only through years of experience. This was the critical temperature, the moment when the internal structure of the steel became receptive to transformation. The atmosphere in the smithy grew thick with tension. With a swift, sure motion, he would pull the glowing blades from the fire and, in a single continuous movement, plunge them straight into a waiting trough of water or oil. The reaction was violent and immediate. A great, angry hiss erupted, and a cloud of scalding steam billowed into the air, carrying with it the sharp, metallic scent of quenched steel. This rapid cooling, this shock therapy for the metal, locked the iron's crystals into an immensely hard, rigid structure. In that single, dramatic second, the soft blades became hard enough to scratch glass. Yet this supreme hardness came with a terrible danger. The metal was now as brittle as a dried twig. A pair of scissors in this state might cut beautifully once, only to shatter into pieces on the second cut, the victim of its own extreme strength. The blacksmith knew this risk intimately. He had just performed a necessary but perilous magic, giving the blades their cutting soul at the potential cost of their very life. The success of this entire weeks-long project now hung in that cloud of vanishing steam, dependent on the secrets held within a single, perfect shade of red. The metal now possessed a deadly sharpness, but it was a sharpness that could shatter at the slightest misuse. The blacksmith's work was not yet done. He had given the scissors their soul, but now he had to give them a spine. This next step, tempering, was a delicate dance of controlled retreat. He could not leave the blades in their glass-hard state, so he performed a careful reversal. He would take the hardened, brittle blades and gently reheat them, but this time the fire was a tool of subtlety, not violence. He might hold the blades over the dying embers of his forge, or even heat a thick iron plate and lay the metal upon it, watching with an intensity that bordered on prayer. His eyes were fixed not on a glow, but on a much more subtle transformation. As the metal warmed, a thin film of oxidation would bloom across its polished surface, and this film became his only clock, his only thermometer. It began with a faint, pale straw yellow, the color of old parchment. This was the first sign that the metal's extreme brittleness was beginning to relax. He would let the heat build a little more, and the yellow would deepen to a rich bronze, then to a magnificent purple, and finally to a soft, shimmering blue. Each color was a precise indicator of the metal's internal state. The pale yellow meant the blades would be incredibly hard, perfect for a surgeon's scalpel, but perhaps too fragile for the constant, twisting pressure of cutting cloth or parchment. The deep blue signaled a much softer, more flexible state, tough and resilient like a spring, but unable to hold a fine edge. The master smith was searching for the perfect compromise, a balance point between an unyielding edge and a flexible body. For a pair of scissors, he likely sought that beautiful bronze or a faint purple hue. At that exact moment, judged by his experienced eye alone, he would pull the blades from the heat and let them cool in the still air. This final, gentle heating had relieved just enough of the internal stresses caused by the quench. It transformed the metal from a substance that would snap into one that would flex and recover, that could withstand the repeated opening and closing, the slight twists and misalignments of daily use. The scissors now had a hard, durable edge married to a tough, forgiving body. This was the final secret, the act that turned a potentially flawed creation into a lifelong companion. How many of the enduring objects we rely on today are built upon a similar hidden compromise, a perfect tension between opposing forces that creates true resilience? A new kind of sound now filled the smithy, the high, rhythmic whir of a large stone wheel spinning on its axle. The fiery drama of the forge was over, replaced by the patient, grinding work of revealing the edge. The blacksmith sat before his grinding wheel, a massive disc of sandstone that he powered with a steady push of his foot on a treadle. This was where the rough forged blades, toughened by fire and tempering, would finally meet their destiny. A cloud of fine, metallic dust hung in the air, catching the light from the window and coating everything in a gritty gray film. The noise was a constant, grating hum, a stark contrast to the clear ring of the hammer on the anvil. Here, the smith's strength was channeled into a different kind of control, a delicate and unwavering pressure. He held a blade against the spinning stone, and a shower of brilliant orange sparks erupted from the point of contact, flying in a frantic arc before dying on the earthen floor. His task was to grind away the black, scaled surface of the blade, shaping its final, sleek profile, and most importantly, carving the long, elegant bevel that would become the cutting edge. This was a test of pure muscle memory. The smith had to hold the blade at one exact angle for the entire length of its sweep, rolling his wrist with a fluid, practiced motion to match the curve of the metal. A single wobble, a moment of lost focus, and the bevel would become uneven, creating a weak spot that would snag and tear instead of cutting cleanly. He was not adding an edge to the metal, he was uncovering it, peeling back the layers of its hardened skin to reveal the sharp, resilient soul hiding within. The perfect, continuous line of that bevel was the final, physical expression of all his previous skill, from the secret source of the ore to the precise color of the tempering flame. Every smooth, effortless cut those scissors would ever make was born in this storm of dust and sparks, guided by a hand that knew how to find a razor's edge in a spinning stone. The final stage of the scissors creation was a quiet, almost meditative process. After the violence of the hammer and the roar of the grindstone, the blacksmith's workshop fell into a focused hush. The rough, gray blades, now sharpened but still covered in the scars of their making, needed one last transformation. This was the art of polishing, a meticulous ritual that would erase every trace of the forge and reveal the metal's hidden soul. The smith would begin with a coarse, gritty sandstone, holding it firmly in his leathery palm. With long, deliberate strokes, he would work the length of each blade, the rough stone biting into the metal with a soft, scraping whisper. His goal was to strip away the last of the black forge scale and the deep scratches left by the grinding wheel, a process that required immense patience and a careful, consistent pressure. He could not rush, for a single slip with the coarse stone could mar the surface more deeply than the imperfections he was trying to remove. This was not a task of brute force, but of gentle, persistent abrasion, a slow erasure of the past. Gradually, the dull, pitted surface would begin to smooth out, becoming a uniform matte gray. The blacksmith was systematically wiping the slate clean, preparing the metal for its true reveal. The scratches from the coarse stone were then themselves erased by a finer grade of abrasive, perhaps a smooth piece of emery or a fine-grained whetstone. This was a dance of diminishing returns, each step using a progressively gentler touch to remove the marks left by the previous one. The sound changed from a harsh scrape to a soft, rhythmic hiss, like silk rubbing against silk. With each pass of the finer stone, the metal's true character began to emerge. The matte gray surface started to reflect slivers of light, catching the glow from the forge's dying embers or the sun from a high window. The final polish was achieved with a cloth and a paste made from the finest abrasive powder available, mixed with oil. The smith would rub this paste into the blades with a soft, circular motion, buffing the steel until it shone with a deep, liquid gleam. This high polish was far more than mere vanity. A perfectly smooth surface created less friction as the blades slid past each other, ensuring a cleaner, smoother cut with every use. More importantly, that mirror-like finish was the scissors' first and best defense against its ancient enemy, rust. By eliminating all the microscopic pits and scratches where moisture could cling and begin its corrosive work, the polished surface helped to ensure the tool would survive the damp of a castle storeroom or the humidity of a tailor's shop for generations. That final, brilliant gleam was not just a pretty finish, it was a promise of longevity, a silent vow sealed not with fire but with painstaking patience. The two gleaming blades now lay side by side on the anvil, separate but destined to become one. This was the moment of truth where weeks of labor would either culminate in a perfect tool or a costly mistake. The blacksmith's first task was to align the pivot holes he had so carefully drilled into the thickened bosses of each blade. He would slide a temporary metal pin through both holes, his breath held as he checked the alignment. The cutting edges had to meet along their entire length with no gap, a perfect kiss of steel. If they did not, all the forging, tempering, and polishing would be for nothing. With the alignment confirmed, he would remove the temporary pin and select a small, handmade iron rivet from his bench. This rivet was not a mere fastener, it was the final, critical component of the scissors' soul. He would insert it through the matched holes, the two blades now held together in a tentative embrace. Then, with the scissors resting on the anvil's face, he would turn his attention to the protruding end of the rivet. Using the rounded face of a small hammer, he began to peen the soft iron, striking it with a series of light, precise taps. He was not pounding it flat, he was skillfully mushrooming the metal, spreading it out to form a smooth, rounded head that would never work its way loose. This was an act of supreme finesse. The rivet had to be tight enough to hold the blades securely together, yet loose enough to allow them to swing open and closed with a fluid, effortless motion. The smith was aiming for a pivot with just the right amount of play, a balance that allowed the blades to maintain constant contact along their cutting edges as they sheared. Too tight and the scissors would be stiff and clumsy, tearing the material. Too loose and the blades would separate, failing to cut at all. The final test was a soft, smooth snick as the blades passed each other, a sound that promised clean cuts and long service. In that perfectly peened rivet lived the entire purpose of the tool, a silent partnership forged in fire and sealed with a hammer's gentle touch. Even the most perfectly polished and assembled scissors were still incomplete. Their beveled edges, shaped by the grinding wheel, remained rough and toothy, unable to make the clean, surgical cut a master craftsman demanded. The final, intimate act of creation was about to begin, a quiet ritual that would give the tool its true voice. The blacksmith would take a small, smooth whetstone, its surface slick with a thin film of water or oil, and cradle a blade in his other hand. This was not work for the roaring forge or the shrieking grindstone. This was a task of whispers and patience. With a delicate, unwavering pressure, he would draw the length of the bevel across the stone's surface in a smooth, sweeping arc, matching the curve of the blade with the subtle rotation of his wrist. Each pass was a repetition of a silent promise, a slow wearing away of the microscopic serrations left by the coarse grinding wheel. He was not removing metal in great quantities, he was refining it, polishing the very atoms of the edge to a fineness the eye could not see. The sound was a soft, rhythmic hiss, a soothing counterpoint to the earlier cacophony of the workshop. The smith's entire world shrank to the point of contact between stone and steel, his focus absolute. He would work one side of the bevel, then carefully flip the blade and work the other, maintaining that perfect, consistent angle through muscle memory alone. A single lapse, a slight wobble of the hand, and the edge would become rounded and dull, undoing hours of meticulous labor. This was where the tool truly learned to bite. The final test was as simple as it was definitive. The blacksmith would take a scrap of parchment or a piece of fine linen. He would open the scissors and with a gentle, effortless squeeze attempt a cut. A poorly honed edge would catch, tear, and crumple the material, a clear sign of failure. But a perfectly sharpened edge would glide through with a clean, satisfying whisper, leaving behind an edge as straight and true as a ruled line. That first flawless cut was the scissors' first breath, the moment it transitioned from a beautifully crafted object into a living, functional extension of human will. The final, sharpened scissors felt cool and heavy in the blacksmith's calloused palm. This was the moment of judgment, a silent examination where every previous step would be tested. He would not simply look at his creation, he would listen to it, feel its performance in the very bones of his hand. He reached for a scrap of fine linen, its threads woven tight and smooth. Placing the cloth between the blades, he applied a gentle, steady pressure. A perfect, clean snick echoed softly in the quiet smithy. The sound was crisp and short, the auditory signature of a flawless cut. He felt no drag, no hesitation, just the smooth, fluid sensation of the blades shearing through the material from their very points all the way back to the pivot. He then tested a piece of supple leather, a thicker, more resistant challenge. Again, the scissors moved through it with a confident, clean bite, the perfectly honed edge slicing the tough hide without tearing or snagging. Each successful cut was a quiet victory, a confirmation that the iron source was pure, the fire was masterfully controlled, the hammer's rhythm was true, and the tempering colors were perfectly judged. The true test, however, was often reserved for parchment. This delicate, expensive material would reveal any hidden flaw. A slight wobble in the pivot, an uneven bevel on the edge, and the parchment would crinkle and tear, ruining a scribe's precious work. The blacksmith would take a small piece, hold his breath, and make the cut. The scissors whispered through the dried skin, leaving an edge as straight and clean as if it had been ruled by a knife. This final, effortless pass through parchment was the ultimate proof. It meant the tool was not merely functional but trustworthy, an instrument of precision capable of handling the most delicate tasks. In that series of silent, deliberate cuts, the blacksmith was not just testing a tool, he was certifying a legacy. Every clean snip was an echo of his skill, a promise that this pair of scissors would become an unseen, indispensable partner in the daily drama of medieval life. Yet for those with the means, a simple tool of steel could become a canvas. On finer pairs of scissors, the blacksmith's artistry extended beyond mere function into the realm of personal expression. Once the final polish revealed that deep, mirror-like gleam, the smooth surface presented an irresistible opportunity for embellishment. Using a small, sharp graver, a tool not unlike a miniature chisel, the smith could engrave intricate patterns directly into the hardened steel. These were not random decorations, they held meaning. A traveling tailor might commission a pair with his initials elegantly scripted on the bows, a permanent mark of ownership in a world where such a valuable tool could easily be lost or stolen. A wealthy noblewoman might order scissors for her embroidery, their blades adorned with delicate floral vines or her family's heraldic symbol. Sometimes the smith would inlay threads of softer, contrasting metal into the engraved lines. He would carefully hammer fine wires of gleaming brass or ruddy copper into the shallow grooves he had cut, then polish the surface smooth again. The result was a stunning contrast, a permanent golden or copper filigree set against the dark gray steel. This was more than ornamentation, it was a layer of hidden identity. A tiny, engraved symbol, a star, a cross, a particular animal, could serve as a secret mark, a way for a guild to identify its work or for a clandestine message to be authenticated. The plain, efficient tool used to cut a secret message could itself be a carrier of secret signs. This transformation from utilitarian object to personalized artifact speaks to a deep human need. Even in an age of stark necessity, we find a drive to beautify, to claim, and to encode our stories into the very things we use every day. What humble object in your own home carries not just a function, but a hidden signature from its maker? But the delicate pivot scissors were not the only cutting tool in the medieval world. Lurking in the shadows of the workshop was a larger, more sinister cousin, the shears. These were not the refined, two-piece instruments of the scribe, but a single, formidable piece of steel bent into a harsh U-shape. The blacksmith forged them from a much thicker, heavier bar of iron, hammering it into two long, powerful blades that remained permanently joined at the top by a springy, unyielding arch of metal. There was no delicate rivet here, no carefully balanced pivot. The tool's power came from this solid, spring-loaded construction. To use them, you squeezed the handles together against the inherent resistance of that steel arch, and when you released your grip, the shears would snap back open with a menacing energy. Their primary domain was one of brute force agriculture, the annual sheep shearing. Imagine the strength required to work these shears for hours, the constant pressure against that metal spring, the dull, repetitive snip that removed a whole fleece in thick, greasy curls. They were also essential in the cloth-making halls, used for rough-cutting vast bolts of woolen fabric. While the pivot scissors were an instrument of precision, the shears were a tool of raw production, a reminder that the medieval world was built as much on sheer muscular force as it was on delicate artistry. This heavier, more primitive design coexisted for centuries alongside its refined descendant, each serving a distinct purpose in the complex tapestry of medieval life, one for the careful creation of secrets, the other for the relentless harvest of resources. That final, satisfying snick of the blades was the sound of a contract being fulfilled. The blacksmith wrapped the finished scissors in a soft cloth, a simple act that marked the end of their creation and the beginning of their long life of service. This new journey often started at a local market stall or a guild hall, where the tool was presented not as a mere commodity, but as a piece of perfected skill. Its price reflected this. A well-made pair of scissors represented a significant investment, costing perhaps the equivalent of several days' wages for a common laborer. This was not an impulse purchase, it was a deliberate acquisition for a specific, vital trade. The most likely customer was a master tailor, his own hands calloused but nimble. For him, these scissors were the soul of his workshop. They would spend their life whispering through expensive silks and fine wools, their precision directly impacting his reputation. A clean cut meant a clean seam, a garment that draped perfectly. A tear or a frayed edge caused by an inferior tool could ruin costly fabric and a customer's trust in a single disastrous moment. In the hands of a scribe, the scissors became an instrument of intellectual preservation. They were used to meticulously trim sheets of precious vellum or parchment, ensuring edges were straight and uniform before a single word of scripture or law was inscribed. A barber surgeon would purchase a specialized pair, their sharp points designed for trimming beards with accuracy, but also for more grim medical tasks. And in a wealthy household, a fine pair of scissors was a mark of status, kept by the lady of the house for her embroidery or locked in a steward's chest for mending linens and documents. This high cost and specialized use meant that a good pair of scissors was treated with profound respect. It was a lifelong companion. They were carefully oiled, stored in a dry place, and often passed down from a master tailor to his most promising apprentice or from a mother to her daughter. Unlike a hammer or a saw that might be used by many, a personal pair of scissors developed its own history, its blades thinning slightly with decades of resharpening, its handles worn smooth by a single, familiar grip. This object, born in fire and noise, would now live a quiet life of repeated perfect motions, its value accumulating not in its metal, but in the thousands of flawless cuts it made possible. That final, satisfying snip echoed in quiet spaces far from the forge. In the hushed scriptorium of a monastery, a single candle illuminated the hands of a scribe. His newly acquired scissors were not just a tool but an instrument of devotion. Before him lay a precious sheet of vellum made from the skin of a calf. Its edges were irregular, rough from the stretching and scraping process. With immense care, he would use the sharp points of his scissors to trim the vellum into a perfect rectangle. Every cut had to be straight and clean, for this parchment would hold sacred texts, the very word of God. A jagged edge or a torn corner was unthinkable, a mark of disrespect. The scribe's scissors ensured that the physical page was as flawless as the holy words he would soon ink upon it, directly enabling the preservation of knowledge and faith in an age of darkness. Meanwhile, in a bustling tailor's workshop, the same tool served a different master. A master tailor held a length of silk, a fabulously expensive fabric imported from distant lands. One mistake with a knife would ruin the entire piece, wasting a fortune, but with his finely balanced scissors, he could guide the blades with confidence. The sharp, continuous edge slid through the delicate threads with a whisper, following the chalk lines of his pattern. The creation of a doublet for a lord or a gown for a lady hinged on this precise cut. The tailor's livelihood and the very expression of social status through fashion depended entirely on the reliability of this seemingly simple object. Even the local barber, a figure of both grooming and minor surgery, relied on a specialized pair. His scissors had long, slender blades and fine points, perfect for carefully trimming a nobleman's beard into a fashionable shape. This was a matter of personal appearance and social standing, where a clean, even line spoke of refinement and control. From the monastery to the marketplace, from the noble's chamber to the common shop, the scissors were there. They were a silent partner in the creation of art, the definition of fashion, the spread of literacy, and the maintenance of daily life. This tool, forged in fire and mystery, became a fundamental thread in the very fabric of medieval society. The legacy of these forged companions is written not in history books, but in the silent, oxidized metal pulled from the earth. For centuries, the fundamental design of the pivot scissors remained virtually unchanged, a testament to the blacksmiths who had perfected its form so completely. There was little to improve upon. The slow, patient evolution of the craft meant that a pair of scissors from the 1400s would be perfectly recognizable to a tailor in the 1700s. This was not a sign of stagnation, but of a profound and early arrival at a kind of mechanical truth. The blacksmiths had solved the puzzle so effectively that the solution endured generation after generation. Our most direct connection to these forgotten artisans comes from the careful work of archaeologists. They are the ones who find the scissors, often in the most intimate of settings. A pair might be discovered resting in the dry soil of an old grave, placed there as a grave good for a tailor or a seamstress to use in the afterlife. This final act speaks volumes about the object's perceived value, a personal possession so essential it was meant to accompany its owner beyond death. Other scissors are unearthed from the sites of long-vanished settlements, from the damp foundational layers of a castle's midden heap, or from the buried workshop of the blacksmith himself. Time and the elements have not been kind to them. They are often found as fragile, corroded lumps, their once bright steel transformed into a crust of reddish-brown rust. Yet their form is always unmistakable. Even in a state of advanced decay, the elegant bows and the distinct shape of the blades persist like a ghost held in iron. When a conservator carefully cleans such a find, the true magic is revealed. Underneath that crust, the fine lines of the blades and the smooth circle of the bows often remain perfectly intact. They are silent witnesses, these corroded relics. They testify not just to the scissors' utility, but to the enduring skill of the hands that made them. Each one is a physical echo of that final, satisfying snick, a frozen moment of a craft that helped stitch the very fabric of the medieval world together. That final, satisfying snick brings us back to the castle's cold stone room. The shadowy figure picks up the newly forged scissors. Their polished steel gleams in the candlelight, a world away from the rough bog iron they once were. This simple tool in their hand is the end of an incredible journey, a testament to the blacksmith's profound art. It began with a lump of earth wrested from a murky peat bog, a secret held close by the smith. It was then reborn in the forge's elemental fire, hammered into graceful curves on the unyielding anvil, and finally tempered to hold both a razor edge and a resilient heart. Every step, from the first draw of the hammer to the last stroke of the whetstone, was a conversation between human skill and the raw potential of metal. The blacksmith was far more than a simple craftsman. He was a keeper of elemental mysteries, a bridge between the mundane world and the hidden forces of creation. He could look at a piece of the landscape and see within it the means to cut a secret message, to shape a fine garment, or to preserve a sacred text. That pair of scissors is a frozen moment of his knowledge, his patience, and his silent partnership with fire and iron. So the next time you pick up an ordinary object, a pair of scissors, a simple hammer, or even a cast iron pan, take a closer look. See if you can find the story hidden within its form. Consider the hands that shaped it, the forgotten skills that gave it life, and the quiet mysteries sealed into its very substance. Every object around us holds a secret history just as deep, waiting only for a curious mind to uncover it. We would love to hear which ancient mysteries you would like us to explore next, so share your thoughts in the comments below.